October 16th, 2016, a young 24-year-old mother named Roaa Al Dhanoon went missing. She was a refugee who had fled the chaos of war in Iraq with her husband to build a quiet, safe life in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio. Life happened, and the marriage did not last. She continued to move herself forward, went to work, she cared for her 3-year-old son, and she kept to herself. But on that day, she vanished into the static. When police finally breached her apartment on Edgewater Drive 3 days later, they were hit with a wall of sensory dissonance. There was no body, there was no blood, but there was a smell, a scent that forensic analysts know better than their own names. And there was a scene that made no logical sense, a bedroom torn apart by rage, and a child's suitcase packed with the tender precision of a mother preparing to run. Tonight, we are scanning the airwaves for the truth behind the disappearance of Roaa Al Dhanoon. We are analyzing the glitches in a killer's alibi, the digital breadcrumbs that led to a shallow grave, and the terrifying reality of a predator who believed he could outsmart the system. This is the Lost Signal Investigations. In investigative forensics, we look for a deviation in the frequency, the exact microsecond pattern breaks. For Roaa Al Dhanoon, her disappearance stood out at once to her coworkers. She was a mother, she was a professional, she was a constant. When she failed to show up to work at the restaurant Aladdin's for 3 days, it wasn't just a missed shift, it was a dropped signal. To those who knew her, the silence didn't sound like a sick day, it sounded like interference. On October 19, 2016, the Lakewood police received a call from her coworkers for a welfare check. Now, statistically, most of these calls are noise. Police officers usually expect a quick in-and-out case. But as the patrol unit walked down the hallway of her apartment building, the atmosphere changed. Before they even reached her unit, the air grew heavy. The officers noted a sour smell, something that was starting to rot. It's the kind of smell that police officers have learned to dread, which triggers an alarm in their brain. It means organic decay. They knocked, no answer. They knocked again, silence. They had to follow protocol, without screams, without visible blood, without insinuating circumstances. They couldn't just kick down the door. They were standing inches away from a potential crime scene, separated by a piece of wood and the Fourth Amendment. They had to wait for someone to bring a key. Maintenance was called, and while waiting for the extra key, they started to scan the perimeter. Knocked on her neighbor's door, asked him when she had been seen last. He hadn't seen Roaa in days. They checked the garage. Her vehicle was gone. The absence of the car usually suggests the subject has left voluntarily, but the presence of that smell suggested the presence of something inside. The data was conflicting. Finally, the maintenance worker arrived, and the door was opened. The apartment told a story of chaos. On one hand, it was quiet, too quiet. But as the officers moved room to room, the visuals spoke of something more sinister than just leaving voluntarily. The master bedroom was a mess. Clothes, papers, and personal belongings were tossed everywhere. It looked like a storm had passed through the room. It suggested a struggle or a search for something. But then the officers checked the child's room. This is where the forensic profile shifts. In the son's room, bags were packed by the bed. Clothes were folded neatly. This wasn't chaos. This was preparation. This was a mother planning an evacuation. And then the kitchen. This is where the timeline froze. On the table, a jug of milk sat out, the liquid curdled and separated in the heat. Beside it, a pan of cooked chicken on the stove had dried out into a husk. Quiet dread. The curdled milk and the dried chicken told the detectives that Roaa and her son had been pulled out of this environment in the middle of a human heartbeat. To clarify, the smell, the sour, rotting scent was identified. It was the food, left to decay for 3 days. It wasn't a body. But it started a countdown. As the question remained, if Roaa left with her son, why were the bags still there? Why was the food on the stove? The signal was cut abruptly. Roaa Al Dhanoon was gone. To backtrack the disappearance, detectives returned to Aladdin's, Roaa's workplace. They needed to find the last person to receive a transmission from her. They isolated a coworker named Hamza. He wasn't just a colleague, he was a friend, perhaps the closest person to her in a city where she was largely isolated. In interrogation room, detectives brought Hamza into the box. He was calm. He didn't seem nervous. He admitted that he and Roaa were friends, that they spoke often. But when detectives pressed him on the last time they saw her, he gave them a date that made them look up from their notes. Sunday, October 16th, the night she went missing. To detectives, Hamza told them he was at Roaa's apartment that night. They were hanging out, smoking hookah, just talking. But the atmosphere in the apartment was terrified. Hamza revealed that Roaa wasn't relaxed. Throughout the evening, she kept walking to the door and checking the peephole. She was scanning the hallway. She told Hamza that he was there. He was Fahad Mohammed Saeed. Fahad was Roaa's ex-husband. They had come to the U.S. as refugees, but the marriage had broken. By September 2017, the records suggest the separation was earlier. They were divorced. Roaa was given full custody of their son. But more importantly, Roaa had a protection order against him. Fahad was legally prohibited from being near her. He was prohibited from being near the child. The law had drawn a line in the sand. But on the evening of October 16th, Fahad ignored the line. According to Hamza, Fahad was standing in the hallway, watching the door. Hamza told detectives that Roaa didn't want a confrontation. She was afraid of the drama, afraid of the stigma in their tight-knit community. She told Hamza to leave out the back door. Hamza listened. He left. He left her alone in the apartment, with her son asleep in the other room and her stalker standing on the other side of the door. That was the moment the signal was lost.
Police now had probable cause. They didn't have a body, but they had a violation. Fahad Saeed had breached a protection order. On October 25, 2016 at 1 p.m., detectives moved in on Fahad at his workplace. Watch the demeanor. When they approached him, Fahad didn't run. He didn't fight. He was described as pleasant and in a good mood. When told he was under arrest, he simply asked if they had a warrant. He was clinically calm. In the interrogation room, Fahad played the game. He sat there, comfortable, and spun a narrative that investigators have heard 1,000 times. He admitted he saw Roaa on October 16th, but his story was convenient. He claimed that she came to him. He claimed that around 11 p.m., Roaa came to his house, dropped off their son, and told him she was going to a party in Detroit, Michigan. Analyze the logic of this statement. A mother who fought for a legal protection order against this man who was terrified of him standing in her hallway hours earlier voluntarily drives to his house and hands over her child. She leaves her son with the man the court said was dangerous and then drives out of state to a party? It didn't fit the profile. It didn't fit the packed bags in the child's room. It was a corrupted file. Fahad claimed he tried to call her the next day, but she didn't answer. He played the worried father. But detectives noticed something else. They went back to Roaa's apartment for a second sweep. They remembered Hamza's story about smoking hookah. They found the hookah in the apartment, but it was broken. Parts were in the trash, and crucially, the hose was missing. Hamza had described a working hookah. The police found a broken one. It was a small discrepancy, a crack in the story. They brought Hamza back in. They grilled him. Was he sleeping with her? Was he lying? The result? Hamza took a polygraph test. He passed. Hamza was a witness. Fahad was the suspect. But Fahad was confident. The prosecutor later noted that throughout the investigation, Fahad was extremely confident he would outsmart law enforcement. He was sitting in jail on the protection order violation, but he believed he had wiped the drive. He believed there was no evidence of murder. When the physical evidence went silent, detectives turned to the digital signal and pulled Fahad's phone records. They looked for activity during the critical window of Roaa's disappearance. They found a ping, a communication with a man named Ammar Sami. Ammar was a friend of Fahad's. When detectives pulled Ammar's location data, the map lit up. On the night of October 16th, Ammar's phone wasn't at his home. It was right outside Fahad's apartment. They brought Ammar in. He played the role of the confused, helpful bystander. He claimed he and Fahad just hung out, smoked some cigarettes, and then he dropped Fahad off. He claimed he went to Walmart afterwards by himself. The detectives looked him in the eye and said, "If we find out she's harmed, the people responsible go to prison." He was ready to help. He was smiling. Detectives went to the Walmart. They pulled the CCTV footage from the night of October 16th. They watched Ammar's car pull into the lot. If Ammar was telling the truth, he would have stepped out alone. The passenger door opened. Fahad Saeed stepped out. The two men walked into the store together. They didn't go to the grocery aisle. They didn't buy cigarettes. They walked straight to the hardware section. On the black and white screen, the detectives watched Fahad reach for a specific tool. A 6-foot digging shovel. This is the smoking gun. You don't buy a shovel at midnight with your ex-husband unless you have something to bury. Ammar Sami had lied. He was the accomplice. Police arrested Ammar for obstruction of justice. They had the stalker, they had the accomplice, they had the murder weapon, or at least the disposal tool. But they still had a massive problem. They had a shovel, but they didn't have the soil. They didn't know where the hole was. Roaa was still missing. Months passed. The seasons changed. The trail went cold. Fahad sat in his cell, arrogant and silent. He thought he had won. He thought the body would never be found. But isolation is a dangerous thing for a narcissist. They need to talk. They need to validate their own intelligence. Inside the jail, Fahad found just that, a cellmate who understood him and his language. This cellmate spoke Arabic. He became Fahad's confidant, and slowly the signal began to leak. Fahad told the cellmate exactly what happened on October 16th. He admitted he keyed himself into Roaa's apartment building. He crept down the hallway. He watched Roaa and Hamza together. He claimed he recorded them on his phone, a digital trophy of his rage. Waited for Hamza to leave, and then he entered. But the cellmate didn't just bring a story to the police. He brought a map. In a moment of confidence, and in this case false trust, Fahad Saeed drew a map of the burial site for the cellmate. He wanted the body moved. He thought he was hiring a cleaner from the inside. Instead, he handed the coordinates of his crime directly to the FBI. May 15, 2017, 7 months after the ordeal had begun.
The FBI evidence response team converged on a ravine along Big Creek in Brooklyn, Ohio. It was a dense wooded area, the kind of place people go to discard things they want the world to forget. Following the hand-drawn map, an agent took a shovel and struck the earth. He dug about 12 inches down. He saw a zipper, a canvas bag, and then the smell returned. The same smell that had greeted officers at the apartment door. But now it was final. They had found her, Roaa Al Dhanoon. Confronted with the body, Fahad's facade of the worried father disintegrated. He confessed. But even in his confession, he tried to rewrite the code. He claimed it was self-defense. He claimed Roaa attacked him with a knife in the middle of the night. He admitted to choking her until she stopped moving. But then he revealed the detail that makes this case truly haunt the airwaves. He admitted that after he killed her, he put her body in a bag. He put her in the car and he drove to the ravine to bury her. And sitting in the car, watching the entire time, was their 3-year-old son. The child whose bags were packed. The child who was supposed to be safe. He was the silent witness to his mother's burial. Fahad Saeed didn't just steal a life, he scarred a future. On January 18, 2018, the legal system finally processed the error. Fahad Saeed pled guilty to aggravated murder, kidnapping, and gross abuse of a corpse. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Upon his release, he faces immediate deportation back to Iraq. Amar Sami, the man who bought the shovel and lied to the police, was convicted of obstruction and sentenced to 18 months. Roaa Al Dhanoon did everything right. She left a war zone. She left an abusive marriage. She got a job. She got a protection order. She packed bags to escape when the danger got too close. But a protection order is just a piece of paper. It operates on a frequency of trust that the aggressor will respect the law, or that the system will intervene before the breach. In this case, the signal arrived too late. Fahad Saeed believed he was smarter than the police. He believed he could edit the narrative. But he forgot that every transmission leaves a trace. A smell in a hallway, a missing hookah hose, a phone ping, a receipt for a shovel. The investigation into Roaa's death is closed, but the analysis of the failure remains open. We scan these cases not just to recount the horror, but to understand the mechanics of the glitch, to see the warning signs, the ghosts in the hallway, before the screen goes black. This has been a Lost Signal investigation. Stay sharp, stay curious, and don't ignore the quiet.